we can say, hey, it's all residential, and it could be all breweries, or we advocated that it's certainly not going to be the concentration from the eastern corridor that is seen in call it the central town. The state has a hard time. There's no good faith in CDPHE permitting. They show us the data, and this is what we see. So we kind of met a compromise, and I want to say 600 milligrams per liter was the compromise overall, where you're seeing closer to the 1,000. It's variable influent. You guys know you have a very large commercial, industrial type influent flow in town compared to residential.
Right.
So we kind of, hey, this is going to be mostly residential here in the eastern corridor, and we would like to do 300 milligrams per liter.
That figure being just for the eastern corridor load or for the townwide load?
Yeah, but then they wanted to consider basically a uniform concentration than segmenting different service areas.
They
Because then
wanted a
where do you stop
estimate.
that chunking
Yeah,
down?
and we'll get into the
Okay.
real numbers, but when Andrew talks about Eastern Corridor build out, there's two phases of that project, right? So.
And I wasn't sure what those were either.
Yeah,
but-
so what we have this lift station permitted for is the first phase of Eastern Corridor, which is up to 85
GPM,
gallons per minute.
or I want to, from the hip, 34,000 gallons per day.
Can I ask you guys to just help, because I don't know that everybody knows what these terms are. Can you just do a basic kind of, what are the key metrics that you're having to negotiate or estimate
Sure.
or base this all on? Some of us have had more exposure to this than
Sure.
others, so just so we're not losing people.
So
Don't mind.
when you get a lift station approved through the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, you have to go through a site application. That site application basically gives you permission to put a lift station on that site. And what they are asking for and what you have a permitted capacity for is hydraulic loading, how much liquid essentially is going down, and then an organic loading. What are the solids coming through that facility? So your lift station has to be essentially sized to handle the peak hour hydraulic flow from that area. So you figure out how many houses we think, how many commercial we think are they going to be there, and then we say, okay, it's this many gallons per minute, and then you have to assume that everybody uses water at the exact same time, and you have to use the peak flow. So you actually have to permit that lift station to be able to pump and move that sewage at the peak hour flow from the point from Eastern Corridor to where it's going. And so when we talk about a hydraulic capacity, we generally talk in averages. It's permitted for a peak, but the other thing we're going to talk a lot about tonight is the organic capacity, and that's the same with your wastewater treatment plant. So the wastewater treatment plant also has to be permitted to accept the Eastern Utilities hydraulic load, the gallons per minute, and the organic load, because that's ultimately where it's going. And so that's the process the state looks at when they approve a lift station.
Thank you.
Yep. And we'll get into to answer your previous question, we'll dig really deep into those numbers here in a little bit. Maybe it'll feel more comfortable when we get through some of this other stuff.
So I think just a quick status update on Eastern Corridor utilities. We have approval. CDPHE has said, here you go, you may go build this, but we have a couple conditions. One condition is where you're pumping your waste, that facility needs to be evaluated, and final plans and specs need to be approved for any amendments or modifications prior. Not the work done within that plant, just what's the plan, the final plans and specs approved with the state. We'll get into that in the next status for the WWTP, the wastewater plant update. The second condition is that the Stone Canyon lift station, so you guys, I think everyone's aware, Eastern Corridor is going to Stone Canyon, and then Stone Canyon's that's existing right behind Ace Hardware there is taking it the rest of the way to the wastewater plant. Way back in 17 when we were looking at the different alternatives, instead of having parallel force mains and pumping all the way, utilize infrastructure that you already have to pick up that flow. However, that lift station wasn't sized to take Eastern Corridor, so we are able to sheave the belts and basically increase the capacity of the existing equipment. So there's not a mothballing of infrastructure. So, and that work is part of the scope of Eastern Quarter Utilities.
So it's been bid, it's under
It's-
contract, it's ready to be built. So Stone Canyon, designed, approved, and ready to be built for those improvements necessary to receive Eastern Corridor. And then it's the wastewater treatment plant that is the other condition to that.
And we actually had the pre-construction meeting for Eastern Quarter Utilities today with the contractor and the town, so that project is underway. Oh yeah, look, there we go, look at that bullet. So we're on track to commence in May 19, we did, and they wanna go, so. Now, I think why we're here is the wastewater treatment plant, and what does that entail? It is a direct result, and the reason we're talking about it is you guys have very high influent loading to the wastewater plant. It's a fact, and that high loading, so on the hydraulic side, Josh was talking about that flow, that gallons per minute. You're not overloaded on the flow to your plant. It's really on the organic loading side, which is pounds of BOD. So that's what we'll be focusing on. So
When you said condition one, wastewater treatment plant modifications to increase capacity, you're really talking about the organic load, not the hydraulic
Correct.
capacity there.
correct. Yep.
And so we had a couple choices when we looked at alternatives. We said, all right, we have this lift station, we got to get it to the wastewater treatment plant. Oh, wastewater treatment plant's not big enough to receive this. We can expand the wastewater treatment plant physically and make it bigger and accept more organic loading, or we can re-rate it, which is more of
Right.
a kind of a paper expansion. And so that's what we're talking about now, is we chose the alternative to, let's work with the state to just kind of paper expand this, re-rate things to accept that more flow without having to get into this giant capital project. And we found ourselves kind of somewhere in between, and that's what we're gonna talk about.
And Wayne brought those loadings, when the board wants to see those for 2018 and 19.
So just to put, you'll get into some of those
Yeah,
loads.
we're gonna get
Okay.
there. And I'm gonna try to kind of run through, thinking that there might be questions at the end, but don't
Sorry.
raise a question if you have one. So, like Josh said, that the intent was to increase the organic capacity. That was the whole goal of the initial re-rating project, so that we could accept the flows from, this lift station in the Eastern Corridor. We did a lot of testing, detailed wastewater characterization throughout different manholes, thinking, okay, we can find the smoking gun. This is the one high loader in town. We got you, and we can help mitigate that. Well, through this characterization, I'm talking about collection system sampling, not the characterization, but it was pretty consistently high throughout the collection system, which was surprising. And then we also did a detailed characterization of the influent flow, where you're taking samples multiple times a day at the wastewater plant to help build a biowind model, so we can model in a computer model the biological and chemical process that is happening in the wastewater plant.
So typically, what Wayne and his group do is they sample, I think it's monthly.
Well, unfortunately, you guys are actually only required to do it quarterly.
Yeah.
That's some of the issues, right? Because if you think about how many samples did you take in 10 years, that's only 40 samples. That's not a lot to hang your
Not a
head
lot of
on,
data.
right? So we took it upon ourselves to help these guys, as well as see if we to do it weekly. So that way, and so we try to do Sunday through Monday, because that's usually would it be indicative of people coming in on Monday, what's a daytime like, and it also includes like what a weekend could be like, where it would be a festival or just a regular old Sunday. But we do once in a while take samples during the week just to, just see what else is going on.
So with a lack of data, or without that big, long history of data, we want to know, what is your loading to that wastewater treatment plant, like every day for a week? And is it different on Mondays? Is it different on Saturdays when you have a bunch of people in town? So we did a detailed wastewater characterization, and that's what led to the model that Andrew was talking about.
And so then taking that model led into that was the meat of the re-rating report, which was ultimately a site application, your first step in permitting with CDPHE. So the site application was submitted in October of 18. We received a request for information from CDPHE in December, and really they're like, we just need to see more data. And And they were curious about the low flow conditions, because we were proposing minimal modifications to the plant to try to meet this higher load. And they said, well, how does this model, how would it work at low flows? Where the hydraulic to organic ratios are going to be differently. So we updated the model through the winter, and then in March, we submitted a response to the state on their questions. We have not heard back from them. We tried pinging them late last week. Haven't heard anything back, but we'll continue to stay on them. It's 90-day process, if we're lucky, to get a response from the state. But I think the status is right now, the site app's in, CDPHE has acknowledged it, reviewed it, asked questions, and we've responded to those questions.
Can I just ask you to maybe go back and talk a little bit more about the model itself and what you learned from all that data? I think the last time we saw actual data was maybe before you started collecting more frequently. What did you learn, I guess, from that? I mean, it sounds like I think we've heard the update that there was no like smoking gun,
Sure,
if you will,
yeah.
but how is our data unusual compared to other communities? or
It's
what do you-
highly unusual. Well,
Please.
And what do you think is it the ratio of residential to commercial
Yes.
activity?
So
basically?
we're the town engineers for Nederland and Idaho Springs, two kind of similar sized communities. They are facing a similar issue. There's not a lot of residential flow to offset that really high transient commercial restaurants, breweries, distilleries. That's a very high strength flow. Well, if you have 30,000 people in one brewery, you can dilute that flow really easily, right? You wouldn't even notice that it was there because it's not a big volume. But similar to Netherlands, similar to Idaho Springs, similar to Lyons, you have a lot of restaurants, you have a lot of breweries, you have a distillery, you have all those commercial type and industrial type of flows, and not enough people to dilute it. And so just to put that in perspective, normally we're seeing a trend that is going up with strength. Wastewater is getting stronger and stronger because people are using less water. Fixtures are more efficient, so the low flow toilet fixtures, the low flow shower heads, the low flow energy efficient dishwashers and washing machines. So just traditionally, we used to see 200, 250 milligrams per liter. We're now seeing 350 to even 400. That would be normal for a normal town. Idaho Springs, 700, 800. Netherlands, probably in the 500 to 600. Lyons was in like the 1,000.
Wow.
Which is extraordinarily high. Plant's not designed to treat that. And that's what the model showed. You plug in all this data, you say how much air you have, you say how big your basins are, and you say what your loading is, and the computer starts to smoke and says, no, we can't do
does
that.
not compute.
We've had questions about an additional possible 40-plus housing units being added. So that, if anything, might
Welcome
a
aboard.
little bit dilute,
Yes.
Come on in.
rather than, and it wouldn't, if it doesn't create a hydraulic capacity problem, which apparently it doesn't, it might actually dilute somewhat
Correct.
the BOD.
And that was the
organic
solution.
slurry.
So a re-rating, we said, we need to take more organic, and the way we're gonna take more organic is by taking less hydraulic. So we actually lowered your hydraulic, because you don't need the hydraulic capacity, and what your capacity is based on is pounds per day. So you take how many milligrams per liter and how many liters you're sending through, and you come up with a pounds per day. We need to accept more pounds, so we have to lower the liters that we're gonna accept. And so we actually dropped the hydraulic to increase the organic in order to accept some of that additional flow. And you didn't need the hydraulic. You're only 50% loaded right now. The 40 units can fit in there. The Eastern Corridor can fit in there. Bring on the residential, but it's that really high load. And so we told the state, we think, based on the data, we think 600 milligrams per liter is a good number. The thousands, crazy. Like, that we shouldn't be seeing that all the time.
Was that an anomaly, or were we averaging?
No, you were averaging.
You were averaging.
So the difference is the high flow, low flow. That pre-flood, your collection system was full of holes. We were taking on water and after water after water, and it was diluted. I was diluting everything. As soon as you start fixing everything and closing up all of, you created a higher strength load, and nobody knew about it until you started testing it. So. But we don't think that's normal. So you still have I fluctuations, seasonal fluctuations in your flow. And so we were saying across the year, we're going to be at 600 milligrams per liter at that flow. And the state says, well, what happens when your flow is down? That's when you see 1,000 coming up. So now how's your plant going to handle that? So that's when we went back to the drawing board and modeled those different scenarios. Lower flow, higher load, higher flow, lower load, and how does the plant react? And the model simulates what those results are.
And are you finding that the summer tourist time is a more challenging time for the plant or a better time for the plant? Meaning there's more people in town?
It's
Does that
a
help or
higher
hurt?
load,
It's a
both
higher
flow
load.
and organic, but the water's warmer. So think about our microorganisms that are doing the work.
They
Their
work better
metabolism
warm.
increases in the summertime, so they can handle it, right? You can't hold as much oxygen in the water as you can in the wintertime, but it kind of evens itself out. We just know in the back of our head, like, so if we know a festival's gonna be coming, we'll turn the air up over the weekend. So that way when we come in Monday, we've had extra air to handle that extra load, so we can kind of make sure what goes out into the creek where the guys are kayaking is good water.
And all of these compliance points are based on monthly averages, right? So we can handle a day or, they're 7-day averages or
Yeah.
they're monthly averages. And so we can handle a peak day or two, the plant can react and so the model's trying to simulate what would happen if you had that really high load, but what we care about is the averages over time.
I think one thing that would be helpful for board members who are not engineers in wastewater is to have a summary of kind of like conditions that we need to prepare this plant for. As we make a capital investment in the plant at some point, what are we building it for? And because so that we can say, this is where we think our town is going or moving in this direction. Either we're gonna have more industrial users or we might have some residential growth. I think having some generalizations that you could help us, like say, okay, this would be, if your town's going in this direction, you're gonna need to, be more aggressive, or if you do have a big big, Lions big is 40, 50
units.
houses.
A lot.
Don't quote me if the paper's here saying I want all this development, but I think, just some generalizations around, like whether summer festivals are what challenges the plant in terms of development. But I think just to help us
I think
kind
we
of
can
learn those
lay
rules
out.
of thumb, because
Yeah.
the numbers, you can get really lost in
Sure.
the milligrams per liter and the pounds per day and
Yeah,
If
Yeah.
becomes glazy.
a little bit.
if the proposed improvements are approved, you'll have, say, a pie, and you're using this slice of the pie. If you think about the organic loading, you have this much left. It kind of gets into a planning question. Well, how is the rest of the slice of the pie going to be utilized? Are you going to have 8 more breweries? Or are you going to have 50 more homes? How does that
But you
growth?
can't have both.
But you can't have both.
Yeah, and just thinking, this pie, and you could break it up multiple different ways, and I think it is kind of a planning town growth discussion, but we can help with, well, if you add this many, well, then it would take out this piece of the pie.
And what I want to make sure everybody is really clear on when we leave here is we basically convince the state, because you cannot handle 1,000 milligrams per liter at any time of the year. The plant can't handle it. Your plant is overloaded today as we sit here. Every sample that comes in, the plant's overloaded from an organic standpoint. When those flows start going up with Eastern Corridor, 40 more units, if you keep on the same track you're on and keep at 1,000 milligrams per liter, you're going to overload your plant. You're going to bust on effluent. You're going to violate permits. You're going to have a problem. We've promised the state through our letters back and forth, through working with the town, that the town of Lyons is working on a pre-treatment ordinance. They're going to reduce the organic loading at the same time that we're building this other stuff. So you can't just keep on business as usual, add 40 units, add more breweries, and just ignore the fact that you're going to overload your plant. At the same time, you're adding this development, which is great for the town, great for economics. You have to work on reducing that loading to a target, and that's the target we've set for you, which is that 600 milligrams per liter. So we need to be talking to businesses, we got to be talking to breweries, we got to be, sending out big bills to in the industrial pretreatment to get people's attention, because it's truly overloaded as we sit here today. It's not what we're going to do in the future. It's happening right now, and the only way you can add these things is by reducing what's out there in the distribution system now.
Or you charge them more and then you build a bigger facility, right? I
That's
mean,
the
it's
other
option.
6 of one, half of the
Right.
other.
If you don't rein it in and then continue to grow, keep the strength equal, well, then you need more basins, you need more volume, large capital projects.
You mentioned Ned and Idaho Springs, which both have some concentration, business things like we do compared to their residences. Where do they stand on, in particular, restaurants? As I understand it, pre-treatment ordinances are not that common for a restaurant. Now, grease trap ordinances and inspections and testing are, but pre-treatment for restaurants, is that fairly unusual, or do these other towns do it?
Well, really, I can answer that.
All right.
We do probably 400 or 500 grease trap inspections on a quarterly basis. We do all of Aspen's every quarter. It's how you train the kitchen staff is where it really comes down to. The garbage disposal is not your friend. That thing, if you could get them to do composting, that would be awesome. The likelihood of that happening is not, something. But it's better to go to the landfill than it is to go, because you're taking something that would be $200 a ton. We'll just call it in a weight.
Right.
If it goes to the landfill to $900 a ton when it goes into the wastewater plant. So you see the economics is get rid of you just teach them how to scrape the dishes off, and we train them. We have informational packets that's both Spanish and in English, so that and we will go in and work with a restaurant.
I get that on how grease trap should be done, and we've been upgrading on that. But what about pre-treatment for
It's not
restaurants?
typical for a restaurant.
That's what
Think about one
that's what I've been told.
It's
But
breweries, it's distilleries, it's
Or
industrial.
a bar, just a bar. Think
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
That alcohol doesn't go through that
Oh, I
grease
understand.
trap. That goes right down, and not everybody's drinking their drink. So you'd be surprised how much BOD is left in a half a glass of beer. It's amazing.
Or have you seen somebody pour a beer and they
Just
open the
run it
tap and
out.
they let
Yeah.
it flow out? All of that, every time they do that, that's going down the drain and it's loading our wastewater treatment plant.
How much impact would composting in the residential areas impact it? I mean, if you just figure we have, maybe, just guess 600 homes have garbage disposal and use
Well,
them regularly. Is that a sufficient amount of impact?
You'd be surprised. I'm glad you brought that up because Longmont instituted that last year and they got beat up about it.
They said no disposals.
Well, no, people were like, oh, it's going to stink, it's this, it's that, it's just another utility that you're going to charge me for.
we've already
blah,
heard that.
blah,
We
blah,
haven't
right?
done it yet.
But you know what the end result was? It reduced the organic load
Did it?
like 30% at the wastewater plant
In Longmont,
in Longmont.
with them.
I mean, that's substantial.
I removed my garbage disposal.
Thank you.
Ever since I had to clean out a Headworks when I was about 22, I've never had a disposal.
We have a couple of photos, actually, we could show them, if there's time after this session. Our headworks should only be cleaned out
Annually,
once
maybe,
a year.
yeah.
Ours has to have a monthly from fats, oils, and greases.
Oh, it gets so bad that you can stand on it.
No, seriously, the picture, it's like this deep in a month,
Yeah.
and it shouldn't be that deep.
Well, I just think if you look at our housing stock, the vast majority of it is newer construction. And those homes have garbage disposals.
And really efficient fixtures.
Very efficient, fixtures updated, all across the board. And when you said that you saw it, universally at every spot, no arguing that restaurants are big contributors and the breweries and all that, but I don't think we should discount some of the residential
Oh, no.
contribution.
No, think about it. I mean, a restaurant, your busiest restaurant, if it serves 300 meals a night, let's say, well, think about how many homes made 300 meals, right?
300 homes.
So think about that, right? I mean, look how many, the residential provides just as much as
Yeah.
the commercial does, without a doubt. And there's good educational programs. When I was on St. Vrain Sand District, I was the board president, we used to give out little jugs with these little inserts that were like where you could wrap it up and throw it in the garbage. You could put your grease in, you could put food scraps, things like that. It's education is the biggest aspect
So
of how you
Yeah.
change people.
The two things we have to do is, one, we're gonna give you as much capacity in that existing plant for as least money as we possibly can. We're gonna increase that organic capacity as much as we possibly can, but at the same time, we need that other prong, which is educating, reducing, pre-treating, whatever we can do to lower it. And so there are modifications to the treatment plant in order to get this plan through.
Good transition. So, based on the modeling and all the sampling that we conducted, really, to reiterate what Josh said, increased the organic load while reducing the hydraulic capacity about 80,000 gallons per day. Also, to meet this higher load, you're going to add more oxygen, one big component in treating wastewater and keeping the microorganisms happy that are actually doing all the hard work. And then optimizing, maybe changing the location, but looking at the return flows, which is the centrate, the water that comes out of the pressed solids in your centrate, and then decanting from the digester. Those are your two major return flows. So just looking at rerouting and optimizing. That's, at a high level, that's the proposed improvements along with the kind of trade, higher organic loading, lower flow.
So you can see in this memo, we're going from 222 milligrams per liter at 381,000 gallons a day to 600 milligrams per liter at 300,000 gallons a day. So we're not losing too much hydraulic, but we're tripling the organic. And the only way to get that to even to 600 is we need more air. And to get more air, we've got some, clever modifications to keep the cost down.
Yeah, and the clever modifications are similar to the Stone Canyon lift station. You can what they call sheave the belts to get more air out of an existing blower.
Without buying a new blower.
So you're not mothballing your existing infrastructure and then also adding a fourth, because we can't get all of it by just sheaving the existing blowers. And really, you're more than doubling your organic capacity from 700 pounds per day right now to 1,500 pounds per day at the proposed. We don't have an approval in hand. This is in the state's hand under review right now, as discussed earlier.
When they permit the organic capacity, do they do the same thing as they do with the hydraulic capacity and permit it for the max, or do they use an average?
It's
your maximum
daily
average day. Yeah.
So it's the daily average during the maximum month. So if that's July, or August, festival season, whatever it is, it's whatever the average is during that maximum month.
And our summertime would be probably our maximum month.
Usually, yes.
It's when your ammonia load's the highest.
Yeah.
And so we had to prove that our model, that our wastewater treatment plant could do that through the model. We share a model with the state. They dig into the model, see what our assumptions were, and believe us or not, and then they approve it based on what we think it's going to do. Now, this is Eastern Corridor is now approved for 85,000 or 85 gallons per minute, and then you have these. We can still accept other development. We can still accept other flows. We can still add customers. We just have to manage the system to keep it below limits. They don't say like, you can only accept flow from this person and not this person. It's just now your treatment plant is available for this much. Now you get to manage how much, where that comes from and how it gets in.
So right now, the only thing we have there for certain in the Eastern Corridor is our own Public Works building, which I presume is fairly small. It's just a couple of
You'll get a
restrooms.
flush a day.
So we have to.
No, you get more than that.
Couple flushes.
Everybody wait and flush. So we need to be careful what types of businesses we recruit or approve for that area. We need to, that's something we ought to have in mind when we're looking at
the
development
economic
proposals
development
is
guys,
what type of BOD loading, organic loading are those businesses going to create?
And I don't know if I would make economic development decisions based on what kind of load they're, but they
That's
need
what
to
I'm
properly pre-treat. So you could put another 50 breweries out there
they
as
all
long as people are properly treating. So Avery Brewery is a massive brewery in Niwater.
Gun Barrel.
Thank you.
Been there many times.
So that was going to be a really big load to the city of
bet.
Boulder. Even though City of Boulder is very large, it was going to be a very large load. They made a partnership with the Avery Brewery and said, you guys keep all that beer waste, put it into a big giant container, and we're going to come pick it up in trucks. And we're going to bring it to our wastewater treatment plant. We're going to put it into big tanks, and we're going to feed it as food to our wastewater treatment when I want it. Slowly, controlled, all those things. And so you can have a great partnership with these industrial users. You just have to manage it properly on your terms. Because, somebody sitting in a brewery just throwing stuff down the drain is not helping your wastewater. But you can have a great business out there. You can have great economic development. You can have a big factory. You just have to manage how you're receiving the waste through knowledge, through pre-treatment. And because the idea behind pre-treatment is you as the industrial waste generator, you must reduce your waste to be matching what the residential would normally be. And that's up to you. And in a brand new facility, that's easy to do, right? You're building new construction, you can put in tanks, you can put in, proper drain lines, you can separate your waste, you can side stream your waste, you can do all these things. What's really hard about Netherland, Idaho Springs, Lyons, you go into an existing building that's, in Idaho Springs, Tommyknockers, we're 10,000 milligrams per liter of waste coming out of there. 10,000 milligrams per liter. And we go in the basement and we look around, where the heck are you gonna put tanks, pre-treatment, all those things? So that's the hard part, is that existing. So brand new facilities, I would not discourage any economic development. It could be anybody, you just have to manage it properly.
And I think just we need to keep in mind, I don't know that we can control what businesses go. We control zoning and uses, and so we'd have to modify the zoning code literally. And I think what we've done is actually the right direction, which is saying you will comply basically with pretreatment already in our pretreatment ordinances. So I think we've somewhat addressed that concern for the most part. It's just a matter of
Or we
implementing
are gonna
that.
charge you enough to make it
Or-
worth our while, because
What
we're
I'm
gonna have
hearing
to
you say,
expand our
though,
plan.
we can charge people all we want, we still have a problem.
Well,
So how much can you charge a
But you may have the
business?
revenue to
Yeah.
fix your problem.
Make the improvement.
But when you have small businesses,
Sure.
that
They
doesn't
can't afford
necessarily
it.
work.
Yeah,
So-
we had a brewery in Netherland that came in and said, hey, we'd like to come into Netherland. We said, here's the pre-treatment that you have to follow, here's the things you're gonna have to do. And it was a very small brewery, and they struggled to make it economically, feasible to be able to do
Yeah.
that.
So, kind of pulling us, excuse me, full circle. I'm just going to close up here and then open the floor. And we're off the talking points, but to Josh's point many times over in Wayne, that the town, no matter this project and any of the conclusions, the town needs to continue to work to reduce the organic loading in the wastewater plant. New development, existing, everything's on the table, and I know you guys have been doing that with your pretreatment and public education. So continue to do that, because that is important. The return flows from the centrifuge and the digester will be evaluated for either modifications and optimization, or potentially relocating where they're recycled to. As has already been happening, continuing to have an increased sampling regime and not just once a quarter, because that doesn't give you much information. And then working with the town and operations and engineering to kind of finalize these adjustments once we have site app approval. So these final bullets here just really lay out what the CDPHE permitting process is. So the site app approval, I'm keeping my fingers crossed in June. We're going to be the squeaky wheel and continue, without getting on their bad side, continue to chirp with them so that we can get the site app approved. The next steps would be your process design report and 30% plans and specs. And that could happen pretty quick, because it's not, you're not building whole new basins, and it's not a huge capital project. So, throwing out there July, that depends on when the state approves the site app.
And we'll stop there. With that, we've also tabled an ad service letter with the town, an additional service, because that requires engineering. So we have to update the blowers, we have to update the aeration piping, because we have to push more air through it. We've got to change some of the locations where return flows are going. All of those modifications require CDPHE approval. And that's the condition of your Eastern Corridor approval. It says, thou shalt get approval on this wastewater treatment plant improvement before you can accept any Eastern Corridor. So that was not in our scope, and we never dreamt that this was going to be part of the Eastern Corridor project. We've kept that out, separate from Eastern Corridor, because it's not an EDA issue. So we tabled an additional services letter attached to the re-rating processes that we need to do additional design and permitting to get that approved prior to accepting flows from Eastern Corridor. And so that's the additional services letter in the amount of $19,300 that has been sent to the town. And then,
And so that's for the remaining work to get our final approval, the 30% design and process design report, and then as well as final plans and specs, which final plans and specs are what the state has stipulated in the Eastern Corridor. And we believe, based on the anticipated June approval for the site app, that we could have approval this fall in October, which is a couple months in advance of when we would be wanting to send flows from the Eastern Corridor.
And then, now you have approval to do it, but then you have to go build it. So the state's just saying, before you can send any flows, make sure you get our approval to do this, knowing that you can do it. And then you're gonna have a little bit of time to go build it, because we know that the day Eastern Corridor gets turned on, we're not just max loading it. So we'll give you some time to actually load it. So we wanna make sure you guys are budgeting for these capital improvements for probably 2020. So if we get all the approvals in place by end of 19, we've got it in the budget for 20, or if we can come up some funds, we can maybe do those. And so we're estimating that the cost for shivving the blowers, new blower, new aeration piping, and rerouting some recycles is around $200,000. So it's not inexpensive by any means, but it's not building a new wastewater treatment plant over. And you had asked about Idaho Springs. Idaho Springs solution is an $8 million wastewater treatment plant, which is what we're in construction right now. So
What's their million, how many gallons per day?
they're 1 million gallons per day.
So they're 3 times that.
Yeah, so. I was going for effect there, not
Yeah. I just wondered if-
drive home that point
yeah,
of,
what the cost for their facilities.
yeah. It's because they're loading so high, it's because they have their permits are getting stricter and stricter, and
Do you
they're
oversee that
growing.
too?
No, I trained Danny Wolf to get his A, so we ran it for him about 6 years while I was training him. Yeah, that was a unique, there was a lot of overflows, sanitary overflows into the creek due to restaurant grease. And when we did the grease ordinance with them, it was, gee whiz, so we're gonna go out of business, people aren't gonna stop here, and I'm like, well, I don't think people want a raft if they know wastewater's going into the creek as well, right? I mean, so you gotta do it. But,
They
we
got
go
there.
up here,
It
we
was
go up
painful,
here every
but they
month,
got
we
there.
do them for them. And we go up there every month, and we'll knock them out, and it's reduced their load substantially. The McDonald's is the worst. That McDonald's, I'm telling you, don't ever put a McDonald's in here.
Tax revenue.
Don't worry.
Hey,
The tax revenue's nice.
We already mixed that.
So,
We need to move on to the water though.
Yeah.
So,
well, he's not here yet. so we-
oh, he's not?
Yeah, so, and so we need to budget for these improvements, and if not, the alternative is another basin.
A major, yeah, you either
A
improve
major.
what you have now, or it would have to be an expansion of the entire facility.
Well, if you ask my opinion, you definitely need a lot more digestion volume. And that's where
Air.
so
Digest.
the bugs go, the food comes in, the BOD we've been talking about, well, that turns to sludge. For every pound of BOD we remove, we make 0.8 pounds of sludge, right? So think about that, right? The basins we have now, the digester, were the same ones you had prior to the expansion. So if you think the wastewater plant's overloaded, the digesters, you can't even call them that. The state won't allow you to call them, they just call them aerated sludge
Yeah.
holding tanks.
And they're not sized properly.
Oh, no.
to Be a
Oh,
true
no, and that-
digester.
And that does cause issues, so that'll be your next big expenditure, will be increasing, so your solids processing, and trust me, that happens all the time, that somewhere along the line, somebody forgot the back end, that upsets the front.
Or they couldn't afford the back end, so they
Yeah.
only took it, so Netherland right now, we're doing solids handling and solids improvements. They just built a plant 3 or 4 years ago, and
Yeah.
now they're ready to
5.
do the solids, so.
And I pointed
it's-
that out to them too.
It's not uncommon, so with all this, we're saying you're gonna spend $200,000 getting to let Eastern Corridor come in, allowing for that, allowing for the, new housing units to come in, but there's still more to do on that
Yeah.
wastewater treatment plant. There's still a long-term additional expansion potentially, or the solids handling facility, because you're overloaded. Now, if we can really tackle that organic loading and solve it on the front end, maybe you don't spend that, but we're seeing this problem fairly consistently in these other communities that are very successful. I mean, Idaho Springs is so successful because of all the restaurants, but it's costing us on the wastewater side. And I think that's similar to Netherland. Everybody loves going to Netherland, eating the restaurants, go to the breweries. We're spending money on the wastewater treatment plant. So we just need to make sure that, the success of Lions means we have to invest in our wastewater treatment plant additionally, even though we just did not too long ago.
Do we have space to do an additional solid waste handling facility because we're in a
Yeah.
floodplain?
Yeah.
Subject to,
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
top of tank needs to be above the floodwaters.
Yeah,
We can,
And
we
which
can.
it is.
Yeah, it can be designed to take on a flood,
That
just
was the
don't
only
go
thing that
over.
was there during the flood,
Yeah.
was the wastewater.
expansion doesn't necessarily mean geographic
Right.
outward
No,
expansion,
no.
which would be a problem for
Improve,
us.
we call them improvements, but what we're expanding is the capacity, the ability of the facility to take on additional loads. Now, what really looking at long-term is, yeah, we have these great projects coming in, we've already planned on, we know what Eastern Corridor could have in first phase, second phase, but eventually Lyons is not gonna continue to grow. So at some point, you just need to be able to handle what's coming in and handle all facets, not just the influent, but also the solids on the back end as well.
For the Eastern Corridor, you mentioned like the 85, for phase one, was that based on particular assumptions about types of, or that's just a number?
It was, there were planning
Yeah, 85
documents.
Yeah,
cents a minute.
Minute.
Yeah, working with town staff of
Okay.
here's the area, and it might have, kinda, you have to guess a little bit of, this is what could come in here.
How much housing, how
Right.
much commercial,
Yeah.
you made
It
some
was based on
assumptions.
Was it 54,000, was that the number in your guys' report?
Day one.
Right.
That's phase one and phase two. And then phase one, I wanna say from the hip is
34.
34,000
Got it.
gallons per day. And then ironically, the 85 gallons per minute comes from getting your minimum velocity in a force main.
That's right.
Based on a 4-inch. If
Capacity
you
is
use a
about,
4-inch, you're always gonna get to 85 BPM minimum.
Right.
But,
sorry,
Sure,
34, about 34,000.
Just make sure my wet well's right sized.
yeah,
All right, thank you all very much. We
Yeah.
really appreciate you coming
Yeah.
in.
thank you.
We're always available for questions and
Thank you.
Thanks for the
Thank you
memos
so
and
much. That was
information
really
and getting us on the same page. Anything you want to add to what you have?
No, I want to hand it out to you. We provide the town a monthly report of all our activities. I don't know that, I wasn't sure if you guys read those. Also wanted to put what the flows have been, like what our testing results could show, so you could kind of see
Different days of the week.
different days of the week, what can happen. And when you do get a hit, that's usually indicative that somebody cleaned something. Right? I mean, that's usually where, and that could be, I think it could be a school. It doesn't necessarily have to be a restaurant. I mean, it could be a bunch of things that can occur, but it would be indicative that you got dumped on.
For 2018, looks like the flows are, the BOD load is lower in the summer than in the winter,
Yeah,
considerably.
yeah, because you got a lot more infiltration, right? You're coming along the river, there's more rain going on. I mean, that's probably the biggest thing of it.
Less
So you
dilution.
dilute it. So if you look at the flow rate, you still, no, I wouldn't follow so much to the BOD number as much as I would the loading, which is the pounds per day that's in the right column. Which it is lower.
And then, as Wayne said, every month they send me exactly what they did on the facility on what days. So that's our tracking for our billing.
And we also, like we try to give you a year-to-year comparison, so you can see if there's been any additional growth or anything that's odd. But after all we said today, know that we've only had 3 violations, and they were all during startup.
Where we exceeded our permit for,
But you exceed, that's the influent loading. What goes out the back end? No, it's
that's
fine
never
water.
been, okay.
And that's what was important to show the state is, we know we're getting highly loaded,
Right.
however,
Yeah.
we're staying in compliance.
Right.
And that's what helps,
Oh,
literally,
yeah.
it helps the state. And as long as you continue to do that, we don't want to get to the point where the state's forcing us, because then you're on schedules and compliance and you have no choice. Right
Yeah.
now, you're in control, you get a plan around that.
So when Mr. Blankenship did the memo to the state to extend that sewer line out there, they came back with a question like, well, you've had 3 violations, that you would have violated, been exceeding what your new limits were gonna be.
Are your emails on the
So, that stuff
letters
happens.
on your website?
Sewer went down.
I have a card. I have a card.
I got a couple other things, but,
You can send it to me, Mark, I can.
okay, all right, I'll just do that. Send it.
Okay. All right,
Thank you guys very much.
Appreciate it.
I
So,
do read that, just so you know all the time.
you get it, I get it, I do too. I get it too.
And you gotta understand too, like, we're not engineers, so we're not gonna write something maybe so eloquent as them. It could be hard telling what it's.
Don't wanna listen to
Thank you both for taking the time.
Thank you for the water part?
That's up to you, but we're gonna talk about our water rights mostly.
Oh, okay.
What we own.
It'll be exciting.
It's gonna be exciting.
Well, you know, when I worked for the city of Broomfield, that's why that number's 52,000.
Oh, okay.
Because when we started buying water, it was like 1,400 bucks.
Jeff, we're gonna have to sit up there because they're actually filming, recording this.
Okay.
So it can be recorded. So this is Jeff Clark, he's with Bishop Brodigan Associates, BBA. Bishop Brodigan, BBA.
Everybody just calls us BBA, so that's
And
fine.
Jeff is the one who submitted the memo in your workshop packet regarding our water rights. And there has been some,
Let's see if I brought my coat in.
is it up there? No, that's yours.
Rocky's.
Is it a Rockies?
Yeah.
Oh, right here. Sorry. There has been some,
Oh, that's okay.
there has been,
This has just got this CR on it, it's like really.
there has been some, I'll just, confusion, I guess, about what exactly we own, how much water do we have, how much water do we need. And so BBA, who has been working with us for a couple of years now, a few years, put together kind of our water portfolio. And then Jeff and I went and met with the city of Longmont and confirmed our data with the data they show that we have, and we're all on the same page. And so we wanted to just take this opportunity to share with the board and the utilities board exactly what the town has in regard to water, and reassure everyone that we're actually sitting pretty good. So this is Jeff Clark.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody.
And Jeff, we have about a half an hour.
Okay. I wasn't quite sure the magnitude that you guys want to get into, so I was prepared for a little bit of anything.
Oh, you could just kind of walk through your memo if you have.
But yeah, I'm happy to do that. So what I thought I might do is just summarize my understanding of the town's water rights portfolio, and then talk a little bit about water for Bone Park and the balance of water supplies with Longmont. Would that meet your needs? And please feel free to ask me questions or interrupt me, or if I use a jargon or some phrase that you don't understand, or maybe I just don't make any sense, feel free to stop me.
Yeah, it did kind of come up because of Bone Park.
Right.
If the board recalls, we have always watered Bone Park with a well that existed prior to the flood. And after the flood, when we went to redesign the park and connect the well, it was discovered that that well was not certified.
Was not legal. I
And
don't
it
mean
had
to
been
put
there
that bluntly,
for
but
who knows how many decades. And so then it was, how are we gonna water Bone Park if we put in these ball fields and these amenities when we can't use what's been used for decades? And so that's when we hired BBA to help us figure out either an augmentation plan or another source of water that we might already own to use. And that's how this all started with the Bone Park irrigation, because it's quite a bit of water we needed.
yeah, the town owns a handful of interesting but very small water rights that were originally decreed for a very specific purpose, and probably have limited value in terms of a reliable supply for Bone Park or the town going forward. They may have a value for a very niche purpose, but that's some weeds we don't need to get into today. The town, one of the key water rights that the town used to own was for what is now Button Rock Reservoir, and that water right was deeded over to Longmont in exchange for about 300 acre-feet a year out of Button Rock Reservoir. And then Longmont went ahead and built Button Rock, and then since then, the town of Lyons has entered into agreements with Longmont in exchange for service. I'm assuming everybody knows that. And there's certain water rights and water supplies that are dedicated to Longmont in exchange for service. The first was the town's most senior and probably most valuable water right, called the Lyons Pipeline. and that was dedicated to Longmont, and then probably the next most valuable supply, and perhaps even the more valuable supply, is a lot of shares in the CBT project. So that's, does everybody know what CBT is, or do you want me to explain that just a little bit? Yeah, so CBT stands for Colorado Big Thompson, and it's a large federal water supply project that imports water from the headwaters of the Colorado, from Grand Lake under a tunnel under the park, and it shows up at Lake Estes and Horsetooth and Carter reservoirs. And water from that system is traded in what's called a unit. Think of a share in a corporation very much the same way. And you, as a owner of a unit, you're entitled to a certain volume of water each and every year. And that fluctuates depending on water supply conditions. But on average, a unit is equal to 0.7 acre feet, which is about 200,000 gallons, which is typically enough for one house, maybe two. In most cities, for Lions, it's probably about two. So Lions owns a lot of CBT shares. In fact, that's a very huge asset in your portfolio, and a very valuable resource for the town. And the majority of those are dedicated to Longmont, also in exchange for service. So when Dave Cosgrove and Victoria first approached me, we were looking at other water rights or irrigation rights or something that we might be able to use at Bone Park. And for a variety of reasons, none of them make perfect sense. All of them would require some extensive effort and cost to try and move them or go back to water court and have them re-decreed. And none of them just jumped out and said, yes, this is the one. This is the silver bullet we've been looking for. And so we went back to the portfolio that was dedicated to Longmont and started working with the town staff to get records of how much water you're receiving from Longmont in exchange for how much is being dedicated to the town. And I began to realize that there's quite a large credit that is given to Longmont compared to your current demands. And so to me, that seemed to be the most logical asset to try and look towards for providing water service to Bone Park. Bone Park, based on the design plans that I've seen, is planning to irrigate about 20 acres, at least initially, and that would have a water demand of around 40 acre feet a year. So we're not looking for a huge volume of water, but it's not small either. And so we decided to go ahead and meet with the town, and it was kind of an interesting meeting.
The city of Longmont.
Yeah, or sorry,
Yeah.
City of Longmont. And I think if I had to characterize what has happened is that the agreements with Longmont are just old enough, and there's been turnover in staff, and the volume that is given to Longmont has always been plenty, that there really hasn't been much of a reason to do any kind of an audit or, really, look at the numbers in great detail. And so, I don't think Longmont has ever really looked either. And so when we sat down and met with them and started going over some numbers, it became apparent that there is a surplus there, at least in nearly, probably 9 out of 10 years, or any year but a severe drought. I think there's going to be plenty there that is on the ledger sheet. And then, so now it's just a question of how do we try and put it to use. And before I talk about that a little bit, I thought I might just stop and see if I went over anything too fast or if anybody has any questions.
Just want to confirm something. When we're talking about Longmont water, that's potable water, right?
The water that is dedicated to the town, to Longmont, is raw water. And then they treat it and,
They
Send
treat
it back.
Yep.
So which are we talking about? Which,
We're talking about raw water.
yeah, talking about raw water.
okay. So is there a delivery mechanism for raw water from Longmont? Or,
So the raw
Yeah, no, not really.
Yeah, so what we're doing is we're dedicating raw water to
I understand
Longmont. They treat it,
Right.
and then they
It comes back to
they
us.
come back to us as,
Okay. But this
treated.
overage, is it in raw water or?
It's in
is-
raw water.
It's in raw water,
yep, it's in their plant.
okay.
But we have no way to get the raw water
That's- yeah.
from Longmont
We have to build a diversion
to
structure.
Lyons.
Or
We have the ability to get treated water here, but it's expensive.
Oh, there's mechanisms to get the raw water through shares.
Well, that's-
Right.
Okay, so
Yes.
you exchange it for some water from some other source, right? Is that?
Another place.
The way I'm looking at it is, right now, all right, we're going to get a little complicated here. I look at things in terms of what's called a firm yield, meaning what's the, especially for a city, what's the, in the worst year ever, like 2012 or '02, what is the yield of your water supply? And then you can also look at on average, and this year is obviously going to be a much bigger than average year. On average, the town of Lyons probably gives Longmont at least 2 for 1 in terms of the dedication of raw water in balance with the return of potable water for your current demands. But in a dry year, that gets a little closer, and I've done a preliminary look at that at the town's request, and I believe that you still have plenty of water even in a very severe dry year, but the ledger balance comes a lot closer than where we're at right now. So back to your question, the water supply that I'm targeting is that cushion, that 2 for 1 in average years that is sort of going unused right now, if you want to look at it that way.
Or someone else is using
You're right, right.
below us.
So the cushion is all in the CBT shares, and like I said, the town of Lyons owns a lot. They own 725 roughly shares, and on average, they might need 200 or 250. And that water, Northern's got a whole slew of very complicated rules and processes, but basically that water goes back into a rental pool and gets rented out to other cities and to ag users. So it's not going wasted.
I understand that, all that, what I'm trying to get at is, they get raw water, right? How could we get raw water to Bone Park?
So that's exactly what we met with their staff about 3 weeks ago, was to say, all right, right now the town is dedicating to Longmont far more than it needs. Can we peel some of that back? Can we undo some of what's currently being dedicated and then use it as raw water for Bone Park? And the answer appears to be yes. That let's proceed. Let's take the next step and figure out exactly what and exactly how we're going to do that.
So why don't you go ahead and tell
Yeah.
what our plan is?
So the agreements with Longmont call for the Lyons pipeline to go first to them, and that's sort of the baseline. And then, like I said, the shock absorber in the system is really the CBT shares. And so the plan A that we came up with is to look at pulling some of the CBT, undedicating some of those CBT shares. And we'll probably need about 55, 60 shares, something like that, to undedicate them to Longmont and then use them as raw water from Northern, which operates the CBT system. And it gets a little particular on how we're going to get it to the park, because the new designs for the intake is on the South Fork, just upstream from the confluence, and the place where Northern delivers the water is the big canal down here at the mouth of the canyon.
At the October home.
Right. And so
So we need.
you want to take water out up over here, and you want to pay it back over there. And that works right up until there's any water rights in between that might go, hey, whoa, wait a minute, you're shorting me and you're paying my neighbor. And there are a couple. And so we'll have to, there always are. So what I'll need to do is work with the state water administration officials, a woman named Shara Summerford, some of you may know her,
Wait, I'm sure. So-
and just say, all right, this is what we want to do, and, you know, who might be injured and when and under what conditions, and, you know, is it in August, or is it when the flows go below 100 CFS? You know, there's going to be a condition that somebody might be injured. And so, you know, my role now will be to sort of look at those in great detail and see if I can come up with a plan to mitigate that injury or find a way to make it work anyway. Does that make sense?
But, I wasn't sure I could understand quite how the pipeline fits or doesn't fit. It seemed like there was some possibility there, but then it was, you have to go to water court or something.
The Lions pipeline?
Pipeline, yeah.
You're talking the Lions pipeline water right.
So there's Lions Pipeline and then there's Lions Ditch.
No, I understand the ditch.
So it's
I
not the
understand
ditch?
Very well.
Okay, yeah, Lions
You're
Pipeline.
you're going where it says, Longmont hasn't indicated since 2010 they're using that pipeline water, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly.
That's, I have my notes too.
Yeah,
Because in your report, it indicates Longmont no longer is using the dedicated water from the diversion based on the 2010, since the 2010 records. So how do we find out if they are or they're not?
Well, we found that out at the meeting. So prior to the meeting, I think, when I put that sort of agenda together, that list of questions, that was really mostly just for Victoria and Dave Cosgrove's benefit, just to help us organize our thoughts. So I apologize if it wasn't written the most clearly way I normally would, but I wasn't sure, because Longmont, the only way I can tell is looking at Longmont's accounting records, and some of them are available online and some of them aren't, and some of them don't really tell me what I want to know. And so like I said, when I put that together, I wasn't sure if they were, and at the meeting, they did confirm with us that they are. And
They are
so,
Using it, is that what you're saying?
yes,
It's used first, before CBT,
correct.
and then CBT water.
That's correct. And that's what the agreements call for. It kind of has a priority list, and the Lions Pipeline water right is the one that should go first in exchange for service, and it does.
So it's like first and then CBT
Yep.
comes?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm sorry if I didn't make that very clear.
So in terms of just geographic,
Yes.
where things go, is there any advantage to using pipeline water as opposed to trying to figure out something with CBT?
Good question. The short answer is no, but let me explain that. The town's total annual demand is about 300 acre-feet a year, and the yield of that pipeline to Longmont is about 150 acre-feet a year. So the demand almost always exceeds the yield of that pipeline right. So there's not a surplus there. If you assume that one goes first, there's not any left over.
So you'd end, even if you used all of it, then you'd have to go somewhere else and get some more.
Right.
Which would be more complicated.
Yeah, if you,
Doing it at two different transactions.
right. So where was I? So CBT, like I said, the Plan A that we worked on at the meeting with Longmont is to extract some of these shares and then see if I can work with Sheriff Summerford and perhaps a little bit the town and the water rights attorney to figure out how can we implement a permanent or long-term plan that would allow the use of
What
it.
state agency is that?
Pardon me?
Is it a state agency? You mentioned somebody's name.
Oh, Sheriff Summerford?
Right.
She's the local water official.
Water
Okay.
commissioner.
Water commissioner
All right.
is her official title.
And then down at the state, you work with Colorado Water Conservation Board?
Yeah, that's a complicating wrinkle I was about to get into. So water is allocated by the Division of Water Resources by the state, and the water commissioner is the one that sort of tries to implement all these decrees from the court and administer things in seniority so that no one is injured. And now we're going to try and do something new, so we have to massage it and iron out any wrinkles if we can. So I would work with Shara to make sure I understand who might be injured and when, and to see if there's any fatal flaws there. There might be. And so we'll just see what we can find out. The one gotcha that I'm aware of is that there's another department of the state called the Colorado Water Conservation Board, and their charge is to have water rights for environmental purposes, and they have a lake level protection program and they have a stream flow protection program that files for what's known as an in-stream flow water right. And it's very unique in water law and in my little nerdy world. And they're the only ones that are allowed by law to have a water right where you leave it in the stream. And it just sounds kind of bizarre, but that's just the way the laws are set up.
For habitat.
Right,
for
and it's purely for environmental purposes, and it works really well. It's been phenomenally successful, and it's something that, Colorado in general should be proud of. And so I looked to see if there is an in-stream flow water right on the South Fork, and there is, and it goes down all the way to the confluence with the North Fork. With the planned point of diversion being about 150 or 200 yards upstream on the South Fork, if we take water out there, pay it back down here, hopefully I can work out something with all the other diverters to protect that water right. No matter what, we're still shorting that little reach at the bottom end of the South Fork, and there's just, I'm not going to say no way around it, but that was the first one. I kind of went, ooh, how are we going to deal with that one?
But Longmont seemed to think that the water commissioner might be okay with that, knowing there were no other diversion points between that 100.
Right.
Is it yards or feet?
Actually, it's feet, you're right. It's like
It's only
150
100
feet.
feet.
Well, I was
I mean,
gonna
it's
say, is there
not
a way
very
to
far.
dedicate them the amount of water back or something to
There's-
that fund or something creative with them?
There's a couple things we could do. One of the first things I think will be to go meet with the CWCB and talk to their staff about it and just see the 100, 150 feet. They might just go, yeah, we won't get in your way, Lions. You can do what you want. We won't oppose you in water court. I suspect, as a public entity, you might appreciate this, that they have to have a principle, and they have to uphold that principle, universally, otherwise they just get crucified. And so I doubt they will say, go ahead and do it. They have another program that they call injury with mitigation. And that's where when the injury to their water right is small enough, and it's for a small enough reach, that if you offer them something else in exchange, that the environment, at the end of the day is better off, then that can be something that you can apply for and they will accept. And frankly, I'd like to think that all the different kayak structures and boating structures and all the restoration that the town has been working so feverishly on might qualify, for.
Well, plus the other thing to factor in there is this well was taking much more water than
Right.
that. And it was unaccounted for in those flows, and the flows were still adequate all year long. So hopefully, with what we're going to be taking as a measured water, will be less than what was going out historically.
Is there any way
Is-
for that well to be made legal?
Yeah,
First of all, I understand the well is just gone, but
it was destroyed in the flood.
What?
I want to know the history of it.
Oh,
actually,
they said it could take about 9 years in court to try to get it, and so. then
I'm
we
enough
have
of
to
a
have
history buff, I'm dying to know too, but,
documentation.
it's certainly not worth the town paying me to go find out.
There are probably a couple of people in town who know.
Yeah.
Here she is.
That was well timed.
Yeah, well,
What were they saying? Psychic, I guess.
One other quick question. Any chance of changing the intake point if it's only 150 feet?
Yes, that's a possibility. the system they have designed has some other factors that are driving it to that location, and land ownership is one of them, I believe. But that is an option. There's a couple other options we could do. One is that you move the point of intake potentially to the other fork. Instead of the South Fork, move to the North Fork and pipe something under the river.
Or below the confluence.
Pardon me?
You can't move it below the confluence?
You could potentially move below the confluence. I mean, there's lots of things.
That's where Bum Park is. Just
Right.
Stupid question probably, but.
So I'm just sharing with you my thoughts that based on, as a follow-up from that meeting with Longmont, afterwards I was like, ooh, that could be a problem we'll have to figure out. So I don't have answers for you today, but I just want to let you know.
In general terms, moving an intake point might be more complicated and expensive than trying to come up with a mitigation plan for the 100 to 150
Right.
feet. Okay.
Right.
So can you just, in your estimation, so the town future, do we need to buy water shares? It sounds like the answer would be no.
Based on my review, and let me qualify that, the town has plenty of water for current standards or current population. And obviously there are projections of future growth. And with that, the town has a policy that the future growth buys more CBT units, and that gets included in the portfolio that is given to Longmont. So as long as that policy is in place and CBT units are able to be provided to the town, then I think the town should, always be in good shape.
Okay, so when we talk about just the undedication of if we're giving them more shares than is needed for what, but I guess I'm trying to understand that how do those shares work in terms of our portfolio and availability? Are those available or not really?
It's, yes, they're available every year. And there's, like I said, right now, there's a surplus on the ledger sheet that in extremely dry years, the delivery volume per share goes way down. So there may be extremely dry years that our plan to extract, 40 or 50 shares isn't always going to work.
I'm saying we have talked about so we should have a minimum number of excess shares that we just have on our books, and in terms of do we have that capacity currently?
So how
this
I'd explain it is similar to
understanding?
your wastewater. We have to plan water at peak flow. In this case, the opposite. So if we have a year where we're going through droughts, we have enough CBT to cover us right now, because we're about double what we're using at a full unit or at a 0.7 unit. So we're okay. What our backup water is this Button Rock water that we're sitting on. How
Right.
many? 304?
300 acre feet a year.
300 acre feet a year of Button Rock water that we don't even tap into. And Longmont explained it to us that that's our insurance policy.
That's right.
So they said if there's ever a time where CBT doesn't exist, we still have enough water to serve our community at minimal levels, the whole community.
I guess I'm just asking because if we have proceeds from the Eastern Corridor property sale, and we have to decide, are we putting those towards some capital improvements, infrastructure improvements,
Yeah.
or do we need to buy water?
Infrastructure.
Do we need to buy water with some of the funding, or are we in good enough shape that doesn't?
Again,
need to
based
be
on
buyers
my
for?
review of the town's records, you've got a very nice cushion and you're in good shape.
Now, the other caveat that Longmont and Jeff both concurred was that all of this is contingent that every ounce of new development brings in another water
Correct.
share.
Of course, yeah.
And,
nothing
and they said
changes
that.
with
They
our
said,
policy.
with our policy we just adopted, that was the
Right.
right thing to do. That if everyone moving forward brings a share of water with them, our portfolio will meet our needs on the worst years. And we'll have Button Rock as a backup as an insurance policy.
Yeah, I
Right.
think our thinking, though, was we didn't have enough
Yeah.
of insurance policy, even with that policy. So that was just why I wanted to ask that question.
And
clarify.
both Jeff in his review and the city of Longmont, after meeting with them, both concur.
Right.
That's great
So
news.
do we have a number of shares that we have? That's kind of the big question, is we can never answer how many shares do we actually have available, not in use, but available for,
Well, because we have to dedicate them all,
right?
they're
We
in
have
here.
1.2 from the 2018 letter. We have 725, and we've dedicated 722.8.
Yeah. So we have 1.2 shares on the books that are
2.2?
That's what I got it.
only a
Well, that
couple
was
of
the last
shares.
number I heard, but don't we look at, I mean, every year, we look at that with the city of Longmont, right?
No.
What I'm
Right.
hearing you say is
Let me-
that we're
let me put it-
dedicating too many of those shares.
If I can put
Right.
this a little more directly,
Dedicate all that. It's just because of the 0.7, we're not using it. We have to dedicate a full unit of water.
That's contract.
But I'm saying we could renegotiate the contract
Yes.
and say
Right.
you don't have to
We
do
should
that
reopen the
anymore.
contract.
Right,
It's
they're
been-
saying we
it's
have
been
more
almost
than
20
we
years.
need, even in a drought, we're okay, then,
Yep.
you know, something's not jiving with me there.
yeah, I'm not an attorney, but I'll tell you, just my understanding from looking at the agreement is, you might not need to redo the agreement. You might just need to revisit the dedicated amount with staff. You know, I think the agreement allows for some flexibility in the annual report that you send Longmont. And so I think you should be able to work it out, staff to staff, with some dedication letters saying, this year, we're not going to dedicate as many as we have in the past, just because in the past, you've dedicated far more than you needed. Like, you know, the town owns 725 shares, and in a typical year, you might need to dedicate 225 shares. So you might have several hundred shares surplus, you know, in most years. In a dry year, the game changes and the numbers change dramatically, but, you know, typically, you've got plenty of shares that I think you could extract those without any consequence at all
Well,
to you or to Longmont.
Right now, we're required to dedicate 115% per the IGA
Right.
of Longmont.
Right.
So would that be what would be negotiated, or it's more of that, how many shares?
Yeah, and
that
I've
you're
included
talking
that
about?
15% surcharge, you know, in the numbers that we're looking at.
Okay.
So even with that dedicated surcharge, there's still plenty that you should be able to pull those back in most years.
Okay.
We need to wrap up because we need
Yeah.
to transition.
So
Thank you.
I gave you Plan A is the
Really
use of the
helpful.
CBT shares. Plan B is this 300 acre feet per year that you could have out of Button Rock. Longmont, their preference is not to do that, and they gave us a handful of reasons, some of which I questioned, but
Yeah.
But the biggest one is, as Victoria said, is that's a great insurance policy, that if everything, you know, changes, or you get a blowout in the canal, or something happens to the tunnel under Rocky Mountain National Park, you still have this 300 acre feet of policy sitting in Button Rock Reservoir.
Even if you tried to use that for Bone Brook irrigation, you still have an intake problem because you don't have any intake rights. except
Yeah, the water's
150
coming down
feet
one
upstream.
fork and you want to take it on the other. So
Yeah.
I thought of that.
No cigar.
You still have that same CWCB question.
Yep.
But that one, you don't have to leapfrog other water rights, because you're paying it back, you're taking on one branch and paying it back on the other.
And so you're planning to meet with
Yes.
Shira and take care of that in this coming month, knowing that the ball fields will be done this fall
Right.
and we'll be ready for water, so. We'll keep you.
Sure.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeff.